tutorials about the speaking questions on the TOEFL IBT. Today I'm going to introduce you to speaking task number 4. This is called the general to specific task. It's called that because first you read a box that contains a very general definition of something, then you listen to a lecture that gives you a specific example. Let's look at my board and see the steps for question 4. Step 1. You read a definition of a concept, a phenomenon, or a scientific term. You have 45 seconds to read it. Sometimes if it's a little longer, they give you 50 seconds, but normally it's 45. Next, that disappears. It does not come back. Then, we will listen to a lecture, which is about 90 seconds. It will give you a specific example of the concept that you just read the definition of. Then you will have 30 seconds to prepare your answer and 60 seconds to speak your answer. Your job is to basically go over the definition of the concept, explain the example the professor gave, and show in some way how the specific example is a good example to illustrate or support the definition that you read in the beginning of this task. Here is an example of a passage that you will have 45 seconds to read during this task. You'll notice it has a title, in this case, Legends. Legends is what will be defined in this passage, and it is what you need to write down in order to get a good score. Now, some videos claim that the first sentence of this passage will give you the definition, but that's not always the case. We can see in our example, the first sentence does not define legends. The first sentence says, "The tradition of oral storytelling goes back thousands of years." That sentence only serves to give us a background of how legends start. The next sentence says, "Legends are part of that tradition." Actually, our next sentence gives us the definition. Legends are stories that are perceived to have taken place within recorded human history and are passed on by word of mouth. So you as the student need to write at least that down. Then you should write down whatever other characteristics you catch. Legends often begin with a person whose true existence is uncertain or disputed. Over time, these stories take on exaggerated, larger-than-life qualities that are not based on real events. Legends often reflect the values that are important to the society at the time. You're going to write as much of that down as you can in point form as quickly as you can. I recommend the first step would be to read this passage. It will take you about 20 seconds to read. Then spend the other 25 seconds writing down everything you caught from this passage, but especially the definition of the word legends, because that is the least you need in order to get a good score. How to take notes on the reading part. Now, before question 4 even starts, draw a big line down the middle of your note paper. Use this half to take notes on the reading, and this half will be for the listening. You should start by writing the word T for topic, and whatever the title is of the passage, write it there. So in this case, legends. Then write D for definition. Here, our definition of legends is stories within human history passed by word of mouth. Now, these are not full sentences, and they don't need to be, because when you speak, you're going to fill them out as full sentences. Then I have a couple of small points for the details that I caught. The person's existence is disputed, the stories are exaggerated, and they reflect society's values. Now, as I mentioned, don't write this down until after you've read the passage, because 45 seconds should be divided 20 seconds to read and 20 to 25 seconds to write this part down. Now listen to a sample lecture for this task. Today we are going to talk about the legend of Paul Bunyan, the famous legendary lumberjack of the 20th century. Whether or not Paul Bunyan was a real man, nobody really knows. Several cities have claimed that he was born there, but folklore experts point to a French-Canadian origin to his story. The first evidence of his story came from the Detroit News Tribune, a newspaper in Michigan. Stories were told about Paul Bunyan around campfires and in logging camps across the United States. These stories reflected the pioneer spirit of a country expanding and exploring. Over time, Paul Bunyan's stories became more and more exaggerated. It's said that when he was a child, he could break all the windows in his house by clapping his hands. As an adult, he ate 40 bowls of porridge for breakfast and used wagon wheels for buttons, and that he carved out the Grand Canyon by dragging his axe along the ground. It's even claimed he created 10,000 lakes with his footprints. Bunyan symbolizes strength, the willingness to work hard, and the ability to overcome obstacles. His stories had broad appeal to a nation going through dramatic changes, and this no doubt led to the popularity of the stories told about Bunyan. Now, my notes for the lecture are over here on the right. I've written down everything I could while I was listening, and in fact, I've written down some things that I don't need. What I need to do is look for the connections. I have only 30 seconds to do that, and eliminate any points that aren't connected to the description. So if I look here, Paul Bunyan, legend, lumberjack, that is important because that's who we're talking about. Nobody knows if he's real. There is a connection there because it says the person's existence is disputed, so that's no problem. Stories were first in the Detroit News. There's no connection here, so I'm going to cross that out and not use it. Experts say there's a French-Canadian origin. There's nothing here to connect it, so I'm going to cross it out. Told around campfires and logging camps is connected to passed by word of mouth, which means talking to each other. And then exaggerated, breaks windows by clapping, carved the Grand Canyon and the 10,000 lakes, certainly connects to stories are exaggerated. And then reflected the pioneering spirit of the nation is going to connect to reflect society's values. So I have some really good, really strong connections here that I'm going to mention when I'm giving my response to this task. When you give your response, I do not recommend you use a template. Instead, just try to memorize some useful phrases that you can use to give a good, complete response to this task. And I've written some here on the board. You should start with, the article defines X, whatever the title is of the article, which are, and then give the definition that you got from the article. Then you should spend a few more seconds giving any details from the article that you think are relevant. The part where you talk about the article should only take between 10 to 15 seconds of your speaking time. Most of it should be devoted to the lecture. When you begin talking about the lecture, say the following. The professor illustrates this concept with the example of, I used Y, but of course Y is whatever the specific example is. Y is on X because give any connecting reasons and examples to show how the two are connected, and then conclude your speaking with, that's why Y is a good example of X. For the question for this prompt, it may sound different in each test, but it will always ask you to connect the article to the listening in some way. So it may ask you how the talk showed the importance of what you read about, or how the talk illustrates what you read about, or how the talk provides data to support the hypothesis of what you read about. But it will always ask you how they're connected in some way. So here, our question, which I've written in green, is, using pointed examples from the talk, explain why Paul Bunyan is considered a legend. Remember, during the real test, you will both see this question on your screen and hear it read to you in your headphones. You will give your response in the microphone. to a sample response which would receive a high score for this task. The article defines legends, which are stories that are passed by word of mouth within human history. In legends, the person's existence is disputed and the stories are exaggerated. They reflect society's values. The professor illustrates this concept with the example of Paul Bunyan. Paul Bunyan is a legend because nobody knows if he really existed. The stories were told by word of mouth around campfires and logging camps, and they were exaggerated. For example, he's said to have broken windows by clapping his hands and carving out the Grand Canyon with his axe, as well as carving out 10,000 lakes with his footsteps. These were a reflection of society's values because at the time America was expanding and the pioneering spirit was highly valued. And that's why Paul Bunyan is a good example of a legend. So for my final tips, remember, make sure you show how the article and the listening are connected. Remember to always speak clearly, intelligibly, and coherently, and use a range of grammar and vocabulary. Check out my new Facebook group. It's called House of TOEFL. It's an open group and it's free to join. Next, Karen, another TOEFL teacher, will do a presentation on how the ETS scores both the independent and the integrated speaking. As always, keep practicing and good luck on your TOEFL.